Welcome back to Ponderosa North for the love of Bonanza. Well, today I'm going to focus on some of the child stars that appeared on Bonanza, of which there were many children appeared on Bonanza. I'm just going to focus on a few. I can't name them all, but I'm going to start with Johnny Stevens. Johnny Stevens played young Adam in Inga My Love. Here he is. And I know all of us, I hear this all the time. Oh, how we wish we could have seen Hoss and Little Joe as children. That would have been amazing to see them as little boys. But we only got to see Adam, and he was played by Johnny Stevens. Next is Jodie Foster. She appeared in A Place to Hide. Very young Jodie Foster. She went on to, win Academy Awards in directing and writing and producing. And she played Little Bluebird in A Place to Hide with Suzanne Flechette. Darling little girl. Her resume, I'm telling you, I went to look it up, to find out what episode Jodie Foster was in. Her resume is decades long. She's still going strong, Jodie Foster. What an amazing woman, an icon in Hollywood. Next up is our little Katie Sweet, who played Peggy in 4 episodes. Let me see if I can get them all. The Cheating Game, The Waiting Game, Triangle, and I can't remember the other one. But all the Laura Dayton. She played Laura Dayton's daughter. But the chemistry between these two, between Adam and Peggy, I love every single scene between Adam and Peggy. They were just wonderful scenes. I know that the convention committees would reach out to Katie Sweet to join us on conventions, but she was never interested. She went on. She didn't continue with her acting career, which is a shame because she was a real natural, and went on to do other things. So there it is, Katie Sweet. The next one I'm going to talk to you about is Michael Davis, and he is in Little Man 10 Feet Tall. This guy is quite a talented young person at the time. Not only was he actually playing this guitar, but you can see him on the Dick Van Dyke Show, where he's doing this magnificent flamenco dance. Quite a talented young man was Michael Davis. He appeared in Little Man 10 Feet Tall with Ross Martin, and sort of disillusioned with his father. He's an Italian immigrant, and it's the first time Hoss is introduced to pasta, which is just, don't do that. You'll fall in love with pasta, and he did. That was quite a nice scene, but this young man developed quite a hero out of Hoss, and whatever Hoss did was could do no wrong, and so when you get a chance, take a look at Little Man 10 Feet Tall, and also try and track down that Dick Van Dyke Show. He does a magnificent flamenco dance. He's amazing talented kid. Let me see who else we have. We have Butch Patrick. He was in the Prime of Life, played little Jody. And here he is meeting Ben here. Butch Patrick, of course, went on to do Eddie Munster, I believe, on the Munsters. And he's done a lot of character acting. He continued on into his teen years, into his adulthood acting. Who else have we got here? We have got, I have not written this down, shame on me. But this is another young actor. Here it is, Donald Losby in The Jackknife. Another hero sort of episode where this young man's father is in prison, and he comes back, and then he sort of ends up falling for Purnell as a father figure. And it was quite a touching episode, The Jackknife. So catch that when you can. That's Donald Losby. Then we have Gabrielle. So Gabrielle was a young blind girl. She played by Diane Mountford. Here she is. Very cute little girl. And so lovely. She was just a lovely little girl. You couldn't help but fall in love with her, and the Cartwright certainly did. Here she is behind the scenes with Mike. She's got her hand on his shoulder. He's playing some checkers. So, looks like they had a good time on that episode. That episode is called Gabrielle. Who else have we got here? Okay, we've got David Ladd in Feet of Clay. Again, another hero worship episode where, Haas is the hero in this one. Nobody could seem to get through to this young man. His father was, again, in prison, and the Cartwrights kind of take him under his wing. And Haas, being Haas, seems to be the only one that can get through to young David Ladd, son of Alan Ladd, who went on to do some producing and directing and stuff like that. So, and a very heart-wrenching scene when Haas kind of betrays this little fella, and yeah, it's get it when you get a chance. These are all great episodes. Check out Feet of Clay. Next one I'm going to talk about is, I wrote it down somewhere. Oh yeah, here it is. Pam Smith. She is in The Gift of Water, playing Lindy. And oh my gosh, they were so cute together, she and little Joe. Here they are working on the well. And when Joe comes along, they sort of appear. Haas starts, and then Adam comes and adds his little, 2 cents, and then Joe comes along and adds his 2 cents, finally trying to reach water. But little Lindy has a crush on all of them, and do you blame her? But when little Joe shows up, it's quite humorous sort of scenes with him, dropping the... She's trying to help. All she wants to do is help, and ends up, dropping the hammer on his foot and all kinds of stuff, but then end up defending him because, Haas is sort of roughhousing with Joe, and you put him down, It's really a cute episode. She kind of adopts these older guys, these 3 brothers, as her own. So yeah, very, very touching episode, very good episode too. Pam also did the movie Misty with David Ladd. She didn't do too much after that, but she was a cute little thing. She was really good in that episode. There's another episode called Blessed Are They, and little Joe has to take care of these little kids. Oh, they all do, actually. They're sort of holding them until a custody dispute is being settled. So, of course, the Cartwrights take them, and these children are just... let's just say they are rambunctious. Here they are trying to get their shoes on, and these rough and ready cowboys dealing with these young people. And then Adam comes along, and here, I'll put your little bonnet on for you. So very good, very cute, wonderful when children are in Bonanza. They're just great. A couple other honorable mentions is that Clint Howard and Ron Howard both appeared in Bonanza, as did Vince Van Patten. So if you can think of any other child actors that appeared on Bonanza, let me know. Put them in the comments below. And we will see you next time on Ponderosa North for the love of Bonanza. See you later. So I'm sure I missed some. That was just a basic outline of some of the actors on Bonanza. I don't know if anybody can think of anybody else, or...
Well, you got Michael McGreevy, who was also in Gabrielle and I think we interviewed him a couple of years ago, and he still keeps in touch with her. And I think Andy used her for a audio, or what does he call it? What is it when they talk about their memories while the episode is playing? Right? Did you get Diana What's Her Face as one of the audio people? But Michael was the writer on the first Return movie, right? The Bonanza Return movie.
He was.
Because if you go back and watch the video, he tells a great story. So as a child actor, he did a lot with Kurt Russell and through the years.
He also had a lunch meeting with Pernell Roberts and Richard Stone to try to coax him into participating in Bonanza: The Return. And according to Kent McCrae, he was willing to do it if they paid him a salary of $1 million, which is not so much, but it was more than what NBC, Nobody's Cheaper, wanted to pay him. So he was not in Bonanza: The Return.
I think Michael confirmed that too, because he was actually at the lunch meeting.
Yeah.
He was shocked, but yeah. No, those two little girls were adorable, or the two kids were adorable, and blessed are they.
Mm,
And they're chasing after the pigs when the little piglets come running through the house.
yeah.
That's a cute scene.
Up the stairs going, isn't this fun? Any
But
other
but
I missed? Anybody can think of that
There
were
was two little girls in Gulliver's
Gallagher's sons.
brothers or something, but they weren't boys. They were girls, because I think the father wanted two boys and he got two girls, and that was a horse episode that he was really good with them. But I don't know what their real names were.
Were they the ones that Haas found in that abandoned? Yeah, okay. I remember
Yes, that's right.
that.
It starts off with him burying their father.
Yeah.
Those girls were adorable.
Mm.
The little one was very cute.
Oh my gosh, adorable.
But Andy, you tried to track down what's his face, Losby, didn't you? As well as didn't you try to track down the one who had played was it Katie Sweet? Is that the actress's name?
Well, Katie Sweet was trackable, but she was adamant that she didn't want to talk about her distant acting past, and there was no way to get her to change her mind. And Donald Losby, no, I never was able to find any trace of him in the modern era, which is unfortunate.
Interesting. I'm sure that was an interesting time for child actors. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some
That-
Johnny Whitaker was in everything.
Now, Johnny Whitaker, I just saw a year or two ago at the one in Kanab, Western Legends Roundup or whatever. So I did talk to him briefly, and he had nothing but nice things to say about having worked with Dan Blocker. In fact, apparently they have the same birthday or had the same birthday. So
Oh.
when they were on and it was while they were on the set. So he said Dan didn't even didn't let him have all the glory as far as it celebrating his birthday, and didn't really mention that it was his, but he had nothing but nice things to say. And he I guess has a cause that he likes to push. He's older and bigger now, but he was very nice. I really only talked to him briefly, but he did have that nice thing to say about Dan Blocker. I don't know, has anybody ever said anything negative about Dan Blocker? I feel like I've never
Nah.
heard a negative.
Then there was
They
Lost
better not.
Child, Lost Child, with another one with Dan in.
Lost Child, yes. Little girl lost.
Yeah, our little girl lost.
yeah.
Who was that, Andy? You remember the child star in that?
Linda Sue Risk.
Well, she was annoying.
She was a spitfire.
Oh, that was Susan Harrison.
Yeah, she was.
The little girl in Found Child was adorable.
Yeah,
So was she reminded me of the little boy who played Tommy too. They both had
yeah, he was sweet, wasn't he?
That was Teddy Quinn.
Kim Richards. Did she ever appear in Bonanza?
No.
She's you think to be in a lot of programs during that time.
Ellen mentioned that Larry and Gillespie from Gallagher's Sons became a doctor.
That's correct.
Oh,
I mentioned that in her audio commentary.
How fare thee well to the acting trade. Yes.
Wasn't the little girl in that the same girl in Rain from Heaven? Wasn't she the same little girl?
oh yeah, I think she was. Yes, the little cute one, the
cute
smallest one.
All right. And then the two boys that were adopted in what was the one that Tim Matheson was just talking about with the old guy, and
Yeah, the
Oh,
grandpa.
yeah,
they're very good in that.
yeah.
That seemed I watched that and it seemed very Little House on the Prairie. It was interesting. It's like the music,
Yeah.
like a lot of it seemed like it was already starting to make that shift.
Yeah,
But you know what people forget? It's not that Bonanza had Little House on the Prairie music. Little House on the Prairie took some Bonanza music.
that's right.
True, but it's like it was a smooth segue kind of thing because you already kind of recognize the music, but even just the style
Yeah, David Rose.
again, because Michael Landon had such a hand, I'm sure that a lot of it was very similar, but no.
Yeah, I think little Joe in the end morphed into Charles Ingalls, didn't he? Towards the last sort of like few episodes, you could see Charles in in Little Joe.
No, you could see Little Joe and Charles. You have to remember, those of us that watched the end of Bonanza, it was, if you're going backwards thinking that way, Bonanza was first. So we saw
I
Charles
think he
Ingalls
was thinking
Little
about, yeah, I think towards the end he was probably thinking, well, we know Bonanza's coming to an end, and probably just thinking about Charles Ingalls with
I
his
don't-
grey hair.
Oh, he got a whole bunch of, I think he said he got like 36 scripts. And a lot of them were silly shows.
I don't see any of Charles Ingalls in Joe and vice versa. Joe
Not
was
even towards the end.
Not towards the end, I thought he did.
no, he was no. I don't know. I think they were pretty, to me anyway.
I just think people look back, people who didn't watch Bonanza and watch Little House think that way more.
I see Little Joe in Pa Ingalls once in a while when he laughs, or you go, oh, there's Joe. So
Michael always had that same laugh,
yeah, he did.
very distinguished
I
laugh.
guess all I basically did was go through all the credits and write down everybody that guest starred. I think I hit everybody, but we'll see when we finish this episode of Ponderosa North if I actually did a guest star, because it's I took a lot of breaths in this one.
What was the date when you did the Child Stars one? Was that one of your first, or what? Like, what number was it in your?
No idea.
I love the jacket though. Where'd you get the jacket that you were wearing?
Oh, I don't know. Probably, I don't know.
Did anybody have anything more they wanted to add about any of the children actors? Stacy?
This is more of a general comment, but in the same way that Carol keeps emphasizing that the episodes were only meant to be shown once, and how we couldn't
That was Bob.
conceive of this
Bob
time.
Prince.
Yeah. When I was a kid in the 70s, I was passionate about other children on TV, and I really thought I could do it myself. And I even kept a card file of my favorite child actors. And whenever I saw them in something, I would add it to the file, because we didn't have IMDb, back then. And my biggest childhood fantasy was to sit down at a party at a long table with all my favorite child actors around the table. And I never would have imagined that was possible. And, and I did it at TV West Fest and at, the other festival that I went to. And I still pinch myself that we have that privilege. And even today, sitting there and on a Zoom with only 60 other people listening to Tim Matheson talk about, his recollections. It really is wonderful.
Speaking
We
of
didn't get to ask him about Johnny Quest. Did he do that as a child, or did he do that as a grown-up? I mean, what year Johnny
the voice
Quest?
work in the 60s, he would have been in his mid to late teens by then, Andy.
Yeah, he was born December 31st, 1947. And he did Johnny Quest about 1962, 63, I think.
I thought it was a little later. Okay, all right, good.
Who knew? I had a crush. Well, actually, I had a crush on the dad, Dr. Benton Quist. It sounds weird to say I had a crush on a cartoon character.
My sister had a Johnny Quest crush. I remember. I never watched it, but I remember it because my sister loved it. Tell her.
Bandit and Jim and Haji.
Haji, that's right. And that weird spider looking thing with the every time I see a daddy long legs, that's all I think of. All right. So any more comments about child stars, or we're going to move on to guest stars?
I kind of missed a little of it because I had to go into the kitchen. My grandson was calling me. Was Vince Finn Patton in there too?
Yes, I mentioned Vince.
Okay. I'll have to rewatch it on your channel.
And yes, we will post
Some of it.
if anybody wants to catch any more of her wonderful episodes. You will have an opportunity. As Lori said, it is a bit of a rabbit hole once you get started on them.
It's addicting. It's addicting. They're wonderful. So
Which is a compliment to their producer and hostess.
Yes.
Here's-
It's amazing that you can still meet new people with new things that you haven't seen. That's what just amazes me, is the more people I meet with the Bonanza. So
Agreed.
Okay, let's go to guest stars and see if I've mentioned everybody over 14 years.
It'll be impressive, Barb.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Ponderosa North for the Love of Bonanza. Well, over 14 seasons, there were literally hundreds of guest stars. Some were Oscar winners, some were Emmy winners, some were musical theater stars, some were Shakespearean actors. Some were at the beginning of their careers and some were at the end of their careers. But Bonanza was a plethora of amazing guest stars. Today I'm going to name many. And to baby boomers like us, you're going to recognize all of these names. So I'm just going to get started. Hang on to your hats. Here we go. Scatman Crothers, Dean Jones, Robert Culp, Mercedes McCambridge, Royal Dano, Robert Brown, Warren Oates, Tom Skerritt, Gene Cooper, Ross Martin, Buddy Ebsen, Jack Lord, Marlo Thomas, Leslie Nielsen, Claude Akins, Lloyd Nolan, Ricardo Montalban, James MacArthur, Yvonne DiCarlo. Yvonne DiCarlo was in the pilot episode, A Rose for Lotta. Leif Erikson, Robert Lansing, George Kennedy, Oscar winner George Kennedy. He won for Cool Hand Luke. Ted Knight, best known as Ted Baxter on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Jenna Rollins. Here's Jenna Rollins. Very beautiful woman. She was in She Walks in Beauty. And she was Haas's fiance, but she seduced Adam. Oopsie. Bit of a problem there on the Ponderosa. Where are we? Judy Carn, Stephanie Powers. She played Calamity Jane. Michael Burns, Ed Begley Sr., Inga Svensson, Peter Breck from the Big Valley. Jack Elam, Robert Vaughn. Well, Robert Vaughn was everywhere in the 60s, wasn't he? He was everywhere from Bullitt to The Magnificent Seven to his own TV show, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. He got a lot of work in the 60s. He sure did. Julie Harris, Stella Stevens, Denver Pyle, Anthony Caruso, Hoyt Axton, Tina Louise, Steve Forrest, John Anderson, Joan Van Ark, James Gregory, Ben Johnson, Will Gear, Robert Pine, Simon Oakland, Bonnie Bedelia, Dana Elcar, Larry Linville, Dean Stockwell, Susan Howard, and Joe Don Baker. Ho ho ho, there's way more. Hang on. Pat Hindle, Strother Martin, Anthony Zerbe, John Aston, Richard Thomas, Christopher Connolly, Michael Dunn, Ralph Waite, Richard Kiley. Well, I remember seeing Richard Kiley at the Royal Alec about 40 years ago in Man of La Mancha. And I'll tell you what, it's very memorable for me from my childhood. Listening to Richard Kiley sing To Dream the Impossible Dream, it was just... Every time I think of it, it just gives me goosebumps. Can you imagine a duet with Richard Kiley and Pernell Roberts? Wow, wouldn't that have been magnificent? Okay, let's continue on with Lou Gossett Jr., John Vernon, Dabney Coleman, George Montgomery, Bruce Dern. Well, what Western wasn't Bruce Dern in? Zsa Zsa Gabor, Lloyd Bachner, James B. Sicking, Andy Devine, Sally Kellerman, Michael Conrad, Jack Albertson, Victor French. Well, Victor French, that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship because he and Michael Landon went on to do Little House on the Prairie and Highway to Heaven. Those two must have really hit it off on Bonanza because Victor French and Michael Landon seem to be joined at the hip for the next 3 decades. Don Wells, Iron Eyes Cody, Jan Michael Vincent, Tom Bosley, Greg Mullavey, Wayne Newton. Wayne Newton was on a couple of times, and of course he did a lot of music on that. He sang, "Fare thee well, old Joe Clark, fare thee well, I'm gone. Fare thee well, old Joe Clark, you better be getting on." He also did a Christmas show with some original Christmas songs. I might feature those at Christmas time, but they were very good. So he was on a couple of times. David Ladd, son of Alan Ladd. David Ladd was just a child at the time. John Saxon, Linda Day George, Richard Farnsworth, Robert Middleton, Slim Pickens, Teresa Wright, Clint Howard, DeForest Kelly, Richard Anderson, Joan Blondell. Well, she was great in The Pressure Game. She played Laura Dayton's Aunt Lil. And she was quite the matchmaker, wasn't she? Jim Davis from Dallas, Noah Beery, James Colburn. Okay, James Colburn. He had his first movie with Pernell Roberts in Ride Lonesome, and he appeared on Bonanza 3 times. So he and Pernell worked together a lot at the beginning of their careers. So yeah, his first movie was Ride Lonesome with Pernell Roberts. Where am I? Charles Bronson, Marriott Hartley, Cameron Mitchell, Jane Greer, Ida Lupino, Cesar Romero, Sebastian Cabot, Alan Hale Jr., Jack Warden, Telly Savalas, Carol O'Connor, aka Archie Bunker, Vic Morrow, Ed Wynn, Keenan Wynn, Vera Miles, Foster Brooks, Rip Torn, Jack Cassidy, Robert Mulligan, Sandy Duncan, Keith Carradine, and Robert Carradine, the patriarch of the Carradine family. He was in the episode Springtime. Forrest Tucker, Dub Taylor, Ann Prentice, Chief Dan George, Doc Severinsen, Loretta Swit, Jodie Foster. Here's little Jodie Foster, 6 years old, probably her 3rd or 4th project. She played a little girl named Bluebird, and she was just adorable. Look at her. Future Oscar winner, Jodie Foster, there with Suzanne Flechette. Okay, Ken Howard, Kate Jackson, Ron Howard, David Cassidy. David Cassidy was probably 17 or 18 when he was in Bonanza, one of his first acting roles. Mike Farrell. And there's more. Howard Duff, Barry Sullivan, Ellen Corby, Leonard Nimoy, Julie Adams, Adam West, Batman. Martin Landau, an extremely accomplished actor, went to the Actors Studio in New York. Clu Gallagher and Keir Dullea. Keir was in, he was Hal in 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's his claim to fame. Ozzie Davis, Vince Van Patten, Lawrence Luckenbill, Bradford Dillman, Ronnie Cox, Stacy Keach, Rory Calhoun, Joan Hackett, Earl Holliman, Beau Bridges, Vera Miles, Kim Darby, James Whitmore, Susan Sarandon. Mitch Vogel made an appearance before he became a regular, and Dennis Hopper. Here's a young Dennis Hopper here with Mike Landon. But the most notable guest star, in my opinion, is Lee Marvin. And there's kind of a story behind this. Pernell Roberts was always, I'm bored. Give me something to do. I don't have anything to do. You're not challenging me. So when the script, The Crucible, came along, finally it was a great script. And Pernell thought, oh, they're just going to get some B player to play the sadistic Peter Kane. And on walks on the set Lee Marvin, Oscar winner for Cat Ballou. Well, it was game on, because you know how competition just lifts you, makes you better. And the two of them together were nothing short of dynamic. It was a fantastic episode, a must-see episode. I'll talk about it more in future episodes. But yes, Lee Marvin was the biggest get, I would say, on Bonanza. So that's it. I've named the names. If you can think of anybody else that you recognize, I think I've got them all. Of course, there were hundreds more guest stars on the show over 14 seasons. There was one every week. So and they did 431 episodes. So these are just the most well-known guest stars. So I hope you enjoyed that list. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for your subscriptions. Thanks for your comments. There's lots more to come. We'll see you next time on Ponderosa North for the love of Bonanza.
You need to turn that into a song, Barb. Like the alphabet song, or the the states, how we remember the states.
Got my carradines mixed up. I always get my carradines mixed up.
Yes,
John,
Robert is the youngest. He was Finney, whatever his name is, with Mitch. And then John was the dad.
John, and then David and Robert. And there's another one.
Actually wasn't in it. Keith was in it.
Robert,
the wagon one. He's in Bushwhacked, very young. He looks a lot like Robert. And Robert's in the one with Mitch when they get in the fist fight. That's
right,
Bob.
so except David.
What's that?
All the carradines were in Bonanza except for David.
Right.
Yeah, so I think I covered all the bases there. I think I missed
A lot of people I didn't realize were guest stars. There were some names I was like, oh, really? Wow.
My absolute favorite, although I love Lee Marvin, my absolute favorite will always be Jill Van Fleet. And believe it or not, not in the Stillness Within, although I love that episode to pieces. But my favorite of hers was when she did The Trouble with Amy. I think she was incredible in that. She also was an Oscar winner. She won an Academy Award.
Award winners for sure.
Yep, but Trouble with Amy, she was my favorite character of all.
I think a
What's
lot of
fun
coming of age
Best star character.
becoming actors, you made it onto Bonanza, you were kind of on your way to your career, really.
But it's fun to see them in a Bonanza episode and then like years later in other shows together. Like the one in Women of Fire is in a Trapper John episode years later where she worked with Pernell again and they're older. But it's always fun if you know the reference. Like when you're a kid, you don't get the reference. So it's kind of neat when you go back and now you have those things to reference. It's kind of fun.
The Dirty Dozen one day, and half of the Dirty Dozen were all in Bonanza. George Kennedy, Charles Bronson, everybody in the lineup had been. He was in Bonanza. Oh, he's in Bonanza. You kind of relate all these guys to when they were in Bonanza and who they played on Bonanza. You know.
What episode was Iron Eyes Cody in? You'd mentioned him.
I'll have to look it up. I don't know.
Does anybody know off the top of their head? I always liked him.
Sorry.
I read his biography years ago, which was interesting. Because all I knew him of was just that commercial where he's the crying Indian.
Iron Cody is in fact Italian.
Yeah, he's not even an Indian, but he got very famous for that. But back then, they all were playing Italians and Indians and Spanish and.
Either. I think Marlo playing Asian. No, that's not. No, don't do that.
Politically correct. That's right. Oh gosh, that's funny.
I know. Don't do that. Stop that.
Stop. Just don't do that. Just stop.
Which guest star do you think was not well cast? Because I'll go with Marlo Thomas because I think that should have gone to a Asian actress.
Probably should have, but Marlo Thomas.
Like the young lady that played Su Ling, she was terrific. Why couldn't they have got something like that? You know,
But the thing was, David Dortort insisted that Hop Sing be played by a Chinaman.
No, I know, but I just never got why, except that she was Danny Thomas's daughter. Why would they cast Marlo Thomas in that? It made kind of insulting, I would think.
Her accent disturbed me.
Everything was. She wasn't Asian.
The other one
We didn't know that back then, did we?
the other one I want to mention who didn't fit the mold at all was Guy Williams. I mean, he did not fit. I think I was reading Rose Dortford saying he was not welcome. Sorry, my dog.
Who was it? I didn't hear that. Who wasn't welcome?
Guy Williams.
Guy Williams. When
Oh,
Guy was on, nobody liked him. That's what, according to Rose Dortort that I read in Bonanza. He said they don't know why. He just fit and they didn't like him. And
What were you going to say, Andy?
Marlo Thomas was Danny Thomas's daughter, and Danny Thomas begged David Dortort to find a part for her and to justify and anticipate the criticisms that were inevitable. If you recall the script, Marlo Thomas's character is the child of a Chinese woman and a Lebanese trader.
Danny Thomas. That's how they got away with it?
Yeah.
Couldn't have picked another script for her, though? I mean, there's a million scripts she could have done.
Well, why couldn't she play the child of someone who's Chinese and Lebanese?
I don't know. She just didn't work for me, I guess.
Well,
She worked for everyone else, but it didn't work for me.
she didn't really work for me either. She had very nice things about Dan Blocker,
Yep.
but she didn't like to remember the episode because in the scene where she's thrown into the watering trough. She was injured and sustained a lifelong chronic back injury as a result.
Oh, gosh. See, she wasn't right for that role in any way.
Here you
I'm
go.
surprised they let her do the stunt. That kind of surprises
Yeah.
me.
I guess it was a close-up.
Oh.
Maybe she insisted on
Maybe they
doing it.
gave, yeah, exactly, for the close-up. You may be right. Wouldn't be the first time that's happened, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. The choices that they live and die by.
And I got that from her husband. He said, she doesn't really like to talk about Bonanza. I said,
Phil
"Well,
Donahue?
huh?
You talked to Phil Donahue?
Yeah,
It just passed.
yeah, this was before.
Well, I would think so.
Yeah, he and my mom had the same ophthalmologist.
Well, there you go.
You can't get more of a trivia question than that. And I actually met him twice, and on both times he was happier chatting with my mom, I think, than me. But they had a nice visit together.
You got to have doctors in New York. What can I say? You never know who you're going to meet in a doctor's office in New York.
I guess that's true in Canada as well. But yeah, it's
Not really. I wouldn't say that I'd be meeting anybody in an office. Well, maybe in Toronto, but no. Not like in New York or Los Angeles.
he was very nice, as I recall, and he said that she just will not discuss Bonanza. And I said, well, why was it such a bad experience? And then he explained. So I don't know if that's such a reason, but he said, I know better than to bring up the subject of Bonanza to her, so I wouldn't suggest that you try.
Interesting. I'm sure there were a lot of people hurt on that any show like that where you're action and horses and
Yeah, I would think so, for sure.
stunts and all that stuff.
I found that, and I was thinking of mentioning it to Tim Matheson, but I guess it wasn't really necessary because he did answer my question, how did he go about refreshing his recollection? And he said, well, you got it from reading old scripts and looking at photographs and watching the shows. In my limited experience of talking to alumni, people who've worked in the industry, I have found that with rare exceptions, the adults don't remember nearly as much as the former child stars. So Diane Mountford, Teddy Quinn, Clint Howard, they all had very vivid recollections of being on the show and being on the set because they were little kids at the time. But if you're an adult, sometimes your memory is a little more selective, and I guess that's probably just the way memory works. And I guess by the time we're adults, we have more information, and so it's harder to retrieve it. But I have found that to be a pattern.
And it's probably just another job to them. They're working actors day to day, week to week, and
Yeah,
okay,
I
I'm
would
going to
imagine so to some extent, but certainly Tim's memories are very good, although I suspect he didn't remember anything about working with Pernell Roberts or Leif Erikson. But that's
No, he
okay. I've heard that answer before. Oh, he was a great guy, a professional, and it's really great to work with him. That usually means nothing, but that's okay. You can't remember everything. I have found that people remember things that relate to them personally, like Claude Akins. Claude Akins had very fond memories of Sam Hill because that was a pilot for what would have been his television series. And he didn't remember too much about the Deserter episode where he plays an Army colonel who's come to look for his son who's a deserter, except the following, which I thought was interesting. He said, really all I remember about that show is there was a lot of discussion on the set about changing dialogue. I don't remember if he remembered who wanted the dialogue changed, but it could have been Lorne Greene. It could have been Michael Landon. I'm sure it was not Dan Blocker. Could have been Purnell, but it was probably more likely Michael. and the end result was they had to shut down production, which was very rare. And either David Dortort or Frank Cleaver, who was the story editor, came down to the set to sit down and rewrite the script to the point where the actors were satisfied. Well, they did that, and then they handed out the revised pages, and Claude Akins took a look at it and thought that the revision was crap, and maybe it was substantively, and maybe also it reduced his lines. So he said, "The hell with this. I'm walking off the set." And he said to me, "You know, I've never walked off a set before, so I didn't quite know what to do. So I just went to the John." And I stayed there for a few minutes, and then finally somebody came looking for me, and then I went back, and they ended up revising the script back to the way it was before it was changed. So that's a pretty neat memory, but that's all he remembered from that week.
Well, that's like in your bonus thing with the Ricardo Montalban, remembering them all goofing around and he's trying to be serious.
Yeah, and so you have to sort of you have to tread lightly with those kinds of things, because a lot of people, I mean, I remember in my very first meeting with David Dortort, and I was saying something complimentary. I forget now, I think it was probably Michael Landon. And he said, "I hope you're not looking at Michael Landon through rose-colored glasses." If you pardon the expression to his wife, Rose. But I said, no, I try to be objective. So, when you hear that story about Ricardo Montalban saying that these guys were behaving like kindergartners, I think that there's more than a grain of truth to it, because I've heard it from more than one person. But I think the bottom line is, when the camera was on, they performed magnificently, and you had no inkling of how they were fooling around before that to keep from getting bored or what have you. But certainly you could understand Ricardo Montalban's position, that he was a guest actor, and he thrived, he desperately needed to have rehearsal. And as Tim mentioned, rehearsals are rare commodities. And I'm sure, Ginger, you would say the same thing with your experience on sets, especially if you don't have much of a budget to work with. You can't waste very much time. So Ricardo Montalban's story was very, very elucidating. And I remember also David Dortort telling me that the actor who played Gerald Esquith, the erudite gunslinger, or the lawman who took the law into his own hands, whose name should not escape me. I see his picture. Oh gosh. Anyway, it'll come to me. And an actor got to start back in the 30s. Good character actor. And
Somebody said Dan Duria. Is
yes,
that him?
exactly right. Exactly right. Thank you. Dan Duryea was the first choice to play Death on Sun Mountain, and he backed out at the last moment. And Bonanza's very first casting agent, a man by the name of Gene Reynolds, who later became, very shortly thereafter, became a director and directed episodes of Jackie Cooper's series, Hennessy. He said he remembers being on the phone at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night to get Barry Sullivan out of a party to come to the set the next morning, because Dan Duryea had backed out, claiming he no longer wanted to play bad guys. Yet he played bad guys on both of his subsequent Bonanza appearances. And on his first Bonanza appearance, which was a week before the Ricardo Montalban appearance, the Cartwright boys were particularly naughty and gave him a really rough time. And that's when Ricardo was very careful in not mentioning any names, and I could only speculate. One of the four said to him, "I admire and appreciate what you're doing," and I apologize if I'm repeating what you've heard Ricardo say on the bonus disc, because last week we had Dan Duryea in here, and they walked all over him, and he went and complained to the producer. And Ricardo said, "Do you mean to say that you have done this before and you haven't learned?" It really was a fantastic story. And I hesitated about including it because it doesn't make our heroes look particularly nice. But, what did Tim say? Tell the truth. So that's what that was. And incidentally, Tim cleaned up his story a little bit for the audio commentaries. He didn't talk about smoking marijuana with Charlie Deerkop during lunch. He said they had a little bit too much to drink. And I don't know if that's cleaning the story up too much, but I knew that the truth was marijuana and not alcohol. But that too was a funny story. It's interesting to speculate on the guest stars who went before the camera and those who did not. We all remember very fondly Henry Darrow from The High Chaparral, and his audition, if you will, was Amigo, which was a very powerful show that he did before Chaparral, and he was the second choice. The first choice for the star of that script was Sammy Davis Jr. But according to David Dortort, Sammy Davis Jr. consumed an extraordinarily large amount of alcohol during their brief meeting together, and David just decided that he didn't want to take any chances on hiring this guy. So Sammy didn't do the show. But Sammy Davis Jr. was a big Western fan, and he was a guest star on The Rifleman, for example, and was known among his many, many, many talents as being a particularly good quick draw, fast draw. So it would have been nice to see him. But and another one who really wanted to be on the Ponderosa in the worst way was Dorothy Lamour. She would periodically bug David Dortort and say, "When are you going to do the road to the Ponderosa?" And he said, as soon as we find the right script, as soon as we find the right script. But then he told me as an aside, he didn't think she was much of an actress, and so he didn't try very hard to find the right script for her. How did I come to track down Claude Akins? Because he's now dead. Okay, that's a good question. Well, I was in Los Angeles, and I guess we had a mutual friend, and I'd always wanted to meet him. He was one of my favorite actors, and we met him. I met him in Pasadena at the Hamburger Hamlet, and I remember telling him that high on my list of people to talk to was Pernell Roberts, but to date, Pernell hadn't been very cooperative and interested in talking to me or anyone for that matter about anything for public consumption. So I remember dear Claude Akins said to me, "You give Pernell Roberts a message from me. You tell him if he doesn't get on the ball and talk to you, I'm going to kick his ass," which I thought was a very sweet thing for Claude Akins to say. And Claude Akins was one of David Dortort's absolute favorite actors, obviously because he wanted him to be in Sam Hill. But to hear David recount the story, the NBC executives, network executives, didn't see Claude Akins in a sympathetic leading role. And David argued, well, that's the idea. He's a larger-than-life character. He's sort of a Paul Bunyan folk hero kind of person, and I think he's perfect for the part. And I thought he was very, very effective in that. And according to David, that's why they didn't make the pilot into a series. But according to Claude Akins, the show was on the schedule, and he went to the Philippines to star in a movie called Merrill's Marauders, but came back to discover that NBC had expanded the half-hour Tales of Wells Fargo into an hour-long color Tales of Wells Fargo, and they took Sam Hill's time slot.
Wasn't Claude Akins supposed to be, didn't David consider him to play Adam originally?
Yeah, I think that is true. Fleetingly, David famously said he wanted Marlon Brando to play Adam Cartwright, but that was not happening.
Whoa.
So, yeah, I would say Claude Akins was probably his next choice. But, you know, when I talked to him about it, he really couldn't remember. He said that he remembered considering a lot of actors, and Claude Akins was someone he always liked, but it just didn't click until he saw Pernell on the set of Cimarron City. Coincidentally, the same episode that Dan Blocker was in. Or not so much a coincidence, because Dan Blocker was a regular on the show, but it's...
Dan Blocker was it. I mean, there was no other person considered for Haas, except Dan Blocker.
Yeah, that is true. And I think that he engaged in a little bit of revisionist history, bless him. David Dortort would say that he wrote the parts of Hoss and Little Joe with Dan Blocker and Michael Landon in mind. And that's just not true. But he said that, I think, especially after Michael Landon passed away, because he wanted to, I guess, hear what he thought Michael Landon fans would want to hear. But the truth is, and there's nothing wrong with the truth, that he wrote the part with Dan Blocker in mind, but he didn't have anyone else in mind. And as far as Little Joe, he considered very many actors, and as I guess everybody knows the story, he brought home a photograph of many of the people he was considering, including Michael Landon. And David Dortort's wife, Rose, said, "This kid has a face that's blessed from heaven. If he can act, then you should use him." And so he wisely took his wife's advice.
Well, Rose discovered Lauren Green too. Weren't they at a party and Lauren Green walked in and Rose said to David, "I think Ben Cartwright just walked in," something to that.
Well, that's one way to interpret it. But Lauren Green himself credited a chance encounter with an NBC executive at a party, and the NBC executive's wife tapped her husband on the shoulder and said, "There's your Ben Cartwright," and they had a conversation. I think it's very probable that David Dortort and Rose Dortort also saw Lauren Green at a party at approximately the same time and came to the same conclusion. And David Dortort saw Lauren Green on the set of Wagon Train, working with Ward Bond. So I think those three events all happened within days of each other. As far as which happened first, there's really no way to say at this late date, but I think we can generously give credit to all those people who are claiming credit.
Well, it was meant to be. Lauren was born to be Ben Cartwright. There's no two ways about it.
And he was far from David Dortort's first choice, incidentally. He wanted, I shouldn't say far, but he wasn't his first choice. And I've said this before, he wanted Lee J. Cobb. And in the original description of the character, Ben Cartwright was described as a Charles Bickford type. So he would have been very happy to have Charles Bickford, but neither of those two were available. So Lauren was, I guess, at best third choice. But I agree, certainly it's hard to imagine anyone else doing it. Well, it seems to be a minute before the top of the hour. So wait, Rachel has a question. Yes, Rachel.
On the subject of guest stars who didn't actually make a guest star appearance, didn't Johnny Cash want to be a guest star on the episode of Bonanza?
Yes. I put him in the Dorothy Lamour category. He wanted to be on Bonanza in the worst way. And David Dortort was just not a huge Johnny Cash fan, unlike, I guess, Vaughn Monroe. and David just didn't make a particularly great effort to find a story for him. Although, in retrospect, that was unfortunate because Johnny Cash certainly has a legacy now that's far eclipsed Vaughn Monroe's reputation. But as Barb pointed out, Vaughn Monroe was literally the voice of RCA in the 1950s, and that's why he accompanied the Cartwrights when they had their world premiere in Reno in 1959. But yeah, Johnny Cash was a big Bonanza fan, as evinced by the fact that he recorded a version of the Bonanza theme song. He definitely was interested in the show, and he definitely wanted to be on the show, and he definitely had acting experience. He was in an episode of The Rebel, which was about the same time. That was 1960. I forget whether he was in the first season or second season, so it would have been either 59-60 or 60-61. And he wanted to do Bonanza, as I recall, after that. I had seen correspondence around 62, 63 maybe.
He wrote his own lyrics to Bonanza.
Well, he didn't write anything. It was
recorded.
It was Johnny Western who wrote the theme to Have Gun Will Travel, the closing theme. And he did that as a gift to Richard Boone because he had an acting assignment in an episode of Have Gun Will Travel. Johnny Western wasn't much of an actor, but a good lyricist. And it's possible he and Johnny collaborated, but when I talked to Jay Livingston and Ray Evans, especially Ray Evans, they were very upset because they didn't do it the right way. They didn't ask for permission, translation, they didn't pay an extra fee for it. And B, Ray Evans felt that his lyrics were superior to Johnny Western's, which is debatable and probably not accurate. But yeah, so the Johnny Cash version of the theme song didn't sit well with Jay Livingston and Ray Evans, especially Ray. Anyway, why am I taking questions? This is your room. You should be.
I just collected the list. I don't know stories of people, I know some, but I just collected the list of guest stars. So I hope I got everybody.
It's certainly an exhaustive list, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. So excellent job, Barb. I
Yes.
think moving on to